Right, Amanda. And for those who don't know, FEMA is the National Emergency Management Agency for the United States. And the agency is responsible for helping the nation prepare for, respond to, recover from, and mitigate the consequences of disasters. So, being in the disaster business, being in the crisis business, it's crazy. It's unpredictable. You never know what to expect. Um, there's such a wide variety of events and a wide variety of ways people and communities and tribes and nations can be impacted by these events. So my number one takeaway, and what I found, it was just really essential, Amanda, to have a core set of principles, a set of foundational beliefs that I just treasured, I kept in my heart, I relied on when I was dealt a difficult hand, when I was faced with a challenging situation. And that was number one, my number one takeaway for me. And I found that having a core set of beliefs that not only worked professionally, but also worked personally in my family life was just extremely valuable takeaway. That's number one. Number two for me was relationships, and specifically the emphasis on building long-term positive relationships. And someone taught me that very early in my career. And the more I thought about it and the more I kind of embraced it, the more it made sense to me. It means you're doing what you said you would do. It means you're meeting expectations. You're providing services and delivery. You're building trust and friendships. You're building a legacy. And so that's number two for me, building relationships, which I think is really the core foundational element of the emergency management crisis response business. And then number three, my thinking on number three has really evolved lately. And right now I've settled on what I call my come home principle, which is just simply balancing your personal life and your professional life. And it's incorporating everything from maybe having I don't know, maybe a spiritual or religious component in your life, maybe an exercise routine, a creative outlet, and then most importantly is somehow recognizing and protecting that relationship with your family. And I don't have any secret recommendations for that. I've always just tried to pay attention to it. And something my kids told me early on that sort of has always stuck with me is that it's just really important for you, Dad, to remember how much we sacrifice so you can do what you love. So I start there. So those are my three sort of life lessons, both personally and professionally, that I've taken away from my career with FEMA.
And you did a lot of quite high profile incidents as well when you were there. Was there any one of those that you would say was your biggest kind of learning experience as well?
Yeah, there's a couple. And, I did everything from school shootings to the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the Haiti earthquake in 2010, which killed an estimated 250,000 people. I did tornadoes, floods, wildland fires. So, yeah, there's a couple that really struck with me. 9/11, because of the historical significance of that and what it meant, how it changed the world, and being part of that event, just the monumental historical significance of it is something I'll never forget. And I think about it almost the people I met, the people I worked with, and just what that event meant. I think about it almost every day. Haiti was super tough for me, just because of the mass casualty. I'd never dealt with a event where so many people were killed, and finding orphans in the street and all that. So that was taken away. That, interestingly enough, one of my big takeaways from Haiti was I just felt so down when I came back from that event. And I'd worked hundreds of disasters. That one really hit hard to me. It really taught me a lot about appreciating and paying attention to the mental aspects, emotional, taking care of yourself so you can help take care of others. That taught me a lot about that. And then kind of a big one for me was the Grand Forks flood in 1997. And just because I stepped out my normal role of a communicator and stepped into a leadership role where I oversaw a lot of the federal response activities for all the agencies in that community. And I stayed about a year there. I stayed a long time. And so that one just taught me a lot. It taught me about building relationships, trust. I really learned the full scope of the programs and the different roles and responsibilities of various levels of government. And so when I talk about the three events that probably were most significant to me, both personally and professionally, those are the three: 9/11, Haiti, and Grand Forks flood. Man, and the key word, don't you think the key word there is effective? And effective in terms of accurate, timely, accessible, consistent, readily available, managed carefully. Uh, I think it's just absolutely critical. I think it's lots of times we underestimate the value of communications in a disaster, communications in a crisis. To me, it's just as important as food, water, shelter, financial assistance. It's important as any other life-saving, life-sustaining service, a program, resource that you bring to the crisis situation. Every after action report I read, every disaster I participated in, public communications and emergency public information is always brought up as something that we need to pay more attention to. We need to capture the lessons for. We need to constantly improve. So, not only because I did it, but also because I just see the difference it can make in a community's ability to recover. Right. So let's start with crisis response. Here's a big one for me. Uh, Lately, the last couple of years, I've been studying disasters or response activities that have been labeled or identified as a failure or not meeting the expectations. And it's amazing, Amanda. At the root of a lot of those problems were egos. So a big takeaway for me is burying your ego. What do you do instead of burying your ego? You learn to ask for help. You learn to build relationships. You learn to coordinate. You learn to share information, collaborate, welcome participants. You learn to embrace the idea that asking for help is not a sign of weakness in a disaster. It's a sign of strength. That's a big one for me. And it's remarkable how many disasters have failed where you see sort of egos at play as a root cause of the problems in that event. Another one is just the appreciation of time. In this business we're involved with, and a crisis or response is just recognizing the value of time. It's the one thing you can never get back. You can always bring it. It's way better to be there and not be needed than to be needed and not be there. Craig Fugate, who was a former administrator of FEMA, used to say, when disaster strikes, think big, go fast, and go smart. And if you need to leave one behind, forget smart.
Okay.
And then the final thing in terms of the crisis response area is focus on the what and why. Resources are secondary, but the questions that I always ask are, what problem are we trying to solve? Not necessarily jump to what resource did we need, but first identify what problem are we trying to solve? Is it a housing issue? Is it transportation? Is it a need for debris removal so we can get the power crews in to restore electricity, get the hospitals and stores back open? Focus on the problem, what problem, and then ask, learn why we're doing something. Just don't talk about what we're doing, but explain why we're doing something, why this is a priority, and what we hope to accomplish with it. And then in terms of the crisis communications end, I would say that the big thing for me, Amanda, is that crisis communication, emergency public information, you really need to think of that as an operational element. It's not just throwing your spokesperson out to talk to the press and say, defend us and make sure we don't get good press. It's an operational, and information is just as valuable as any other resource you bring to the scene. It needs to be managed as another operational resource. And the people you place in charge of delivering emergency information and crisis need to be fully integrated in the operation from top to bottom and all the different functional elements. Because when you think about it, every piece of the operation, whether it's a functional area like transportation or debris removal, or emergency communications or public health, all have an emergency information component. Every decision you make and the thought process you go through to make that decision and share that decision and act on that decision has an emergency information component. So really, both the people who work in the crisis communications field and the people who activate, deploy, and use their communicators as part of the response need to really think as that service, and the people who deliver that service as a part of their operations. It's not separate and distinct, it's fully integrated. That I'm getting up there in age, Amanda. You have tons of experience, but and we've gotten to know each other the last couple of months. We've also made friends with some other really wonderful colleagues, and I just think that those of us who have been through these experiences and have some observations, we have an obligation to share that. We have an obligation to the new generation, to the emerging generation of leaders who want to build trust and be authentic, and want to discover how can I commit and dedicate myself to this profession and make a difference. I think we have valuable lessons and observations to share with them, and a lot of people don't. People don't write things down. People don't talk about it. They retire and wrap up and go to the golf course or the pub or wherever and move on. And I just think that an important part of our responsibility, if we've had the privilege and the honor and the opportunity to serve it in these events, these incidents, is to share some of our thoughts.